Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, dear viewers, my name is Danilo Lubkivsky, and I welcome you on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum. Ukraine and the European Union. This is a topic of our today's panel. There are several layers of what we call the European integration of Ukraine. In the existential sense, it means our survival as an independent nation. In the cultural sense, it means our belonging to the European civilization. In the political and security context, it envisages our inevitable, irreversible, full-fledged accession into the European Union and NATO. What underlies this dimension is Ukraine's own ability to achieve the criteria of the European community, and by doing this, to assert its fair place on the mental, political, economic, security map of the United Europe. Now there are three major enemies of Ukraine's progress. The first one is Russia's aggressive incursion into the Ukrainian Western courts. The second is our domestic hurdles, and in many cases, imitation of real steps. One step forward, two steps back. This immobility and uncertainty definitely overshadow many important accomplishments. But also there is a third enemy. The third one is the political indecisiveness on the EU side. How does this real picture look? That would be the core question of today's debate. We have the senior representatives of the European Union with us today, with the European Union institutions, and who shape the policy of our strategic partnership and our integration. For that, I have the pleasure to introduce today with us and to thank for participation Ms. Katarina Mathernova, Deputy Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations of the European Commission. I thank you. Viola von Cramon-Taubadel, a German politician of Alliance 90 Degrees, Vice-Chair of the Delegation of the European Union Ukraine Parliamentary Association Committee. I thank you. Petras, Auštrevičius, a Lithuanian politician, Vice-Chair of the same delegation, of the Delegation to the EU-Ukraine Parliamentary Association Committee. And we have Michael Gahler, a German politician of the Christian Democratic Party and the European People Party, and member of the European Parliament with us today. And on the other side, we have Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who in 2014 signed a political part of Ukraine-EU Association Agreement, and Mr. Ostap Semerak, the minister of two Ukraine's cabinets after the Revolution of Dignity, the former co-chair of the Ukraine-EU Association Parliamentary Assembly, and Minister Semerak established Ukraine's government office for the European integration in the first government of under the lead of Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. So I trust we are going to have an interesting exchange. For that, I immediately start with my questions. And I will start from the pandemic crisis. Arseniy Yatsenyuk told me that he returned from his native Chernivtsi a few days ago. This part of Ukraine is severely hit by the coronavirus, and the situation in that part of Ukraine remains dramatic. The overall situation in Ukraine is far from being satisfactory as well. No nation can handle that pandemic crisis alone. The European Union made notable gestures of solidarity with Ukraine, debunking Russia's myth that Europe is left indifferent to what Ukraine goes through. The European Commission, as I know, announced 190 million euros of support package for Ukraine. The European Parliament endorsed 1.2 billion euros to mitigate impact of coronavirus, and Ukraine expects to receive yet another macro-financial tranche of 50 million euros. So this is a huge amount of support and money. Mr. Yatsenyuk, the European Union stands by us, doesn't it? Would you agree with this? And what do you think? How the Ukrainian citizens, do they really feel that level of this huge amount of support which is delivered by the media and people know that this support is done. You're welcome.
That's very important to remind to everyone in the world that the European Union provided an unprecedented support package for the Ukrainian people. I want to reiterate once again, unprecedented. Billions of euros, technical support, visa-free regime, DCFTA with the European Union, Ukrainian energy independence. This is just to put into the nutshell the achievements that we got together with our European friends. I just came back from my hometown, and you know, the European Union and Ukraine, we are all severely affected by this pandemic. But in any case, due to a rapid and strong decisions of Ukraine, we managed to cope this disease. The thing is that Ukrainian people, they suffer from pandemic and they will suffer from the economic crisis. The German statistics agency just issued the data that German economy is going into the recession, and the same is happening all over the world. And this will severely affect the Ukrainian economy, and this will have implications for Ukraine. The EU decided to disburse around $1.2 billion for the Ukrainian people. And here is the thing, and I kindly request our European friends to realize that it's very important not just to disburse, but to send a clear-cut signal that we did it for you. Just a few minutes ago, I watched a social ad that is distributed by the European Commission on Ukrainian TV channels. You know, if you guys want just to spend money for this kind of social ad, fine. But if you want to say to the Ukrainian people, that's we, Europeans, who support you, and that's what we have done for you, please change the narrative. Please change the way you inform the Ukrainian people about our joint achievements. Otherwise, Russians, they play completely different narratives. And it's easy to sell all these negative stories. So we need to upgrade our public awareness campaign. What had been done, what we achieved together, Ukraine and the European Union, what kind of bilateral and multilateral contacts and contracts and achievements and results we got in the last 5 or 6 years. Once again, I want to reiterate, unprecedented support. We need to explain the level or the magnitude of this support to the Ukrainian people, and we have to reinvigorate our bilateral cooperation. A kind of new energy have to be influxed in our bilateral relations.
I thank you. Arseny mentions that we have somehow to ignite the partnership with the European Union with new energy. And now I turn to Madam Director, Madam Katarina Mathernova. I do thank you very much for joining us and for all your efforts as you shape the cuisine of the European Union policy toward Ukraine. Madam Director, according to various reports, we see that the last year, 2019, showed the lowest level of implementing Ukraine-EU association. This is what our experts say. I'm even afraid of asking about 2020. So our trade declines to, I believe, different reasons, including objective reasons. So, in your opinion, how our association develops and what are the most difficult hurdles to be overcome, and how to improve the association agreement as both sides now recognize the need, the necessity to do it. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to see you, Arseny and Mikhail and Petras. Great to be on the same panel. Well, first of all, I don't really buy the premise that you quoted experts saying that low level or high level of implementation of association agreement. I think that the association agreement is is a fairly complex beast that in fact brings a very high degree and very onerous degree of need to align with EU legislations and norms and institutions. And that's not an easy process. And that's never a linear process anywhere. And it's something that some of it may be more beneficial, some of it may be less beneficial at different stages of development of the country. So I would see that as a fairly mechanical measure, and I don't think it's really truly reflective of where our relationship stands. I was very heartened to hear Prime Minister Yatsenyuk talking about really the strength of the relationship, and I take your point on communication that we should do better. But I think that the relationship is really still at an all-time high. Ukraine was the subject of Foreign Affairs Council just here in April, a few weeks ago, at the end of April, where EU's commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine has been reconfirmed by all, and where support for the reform agenda and the courageous steps that have been taken have been also reconfirmed very strongly. So I think that we not only welcome but support the reform process. I think you yourself mentioned when you were Mr. Moderator, when you were talking about the enemies of Ukraine, and you mentioned number 2, the domestic hurdles, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The way I describe it is that the reform process Ukraine is going through is like biking up a hill. You cannot stop in the middle because you don't stay there. You turn back. So the effort needs to continue, and the EU is very strongly behind Ukraine, not only politically, but as you mentioned, existentially, culturally, and politically, but also in terms of concrete assistance. And here I would like to just reiterate what we have done, because we acted. I've never seen a bureaucracy like ours act with such rapidity as we did in the context of COVID. How by April 8th, we were able to really put on the table very solid package of support for countries around the world, together with member states and EU financial institutions. As a team, Europe, we were able to put on the table 20 billion euros of assistance, and this is where the famous 190 comes to Ukraine. This package was put together, however, before the macro-financial assistance came on stream. So that's an additional 1.2 billion in an emergency macro-financial assistance that has been approved now by the Council and the Parliament. And I also would like to correct, there was a figure quoted by the moderator of 50 million of current MFA. It's actually 500 million of euros of current MFA. So there is I think very strong expression of solidarity, and this goes hand in hand also with the policy dialogue across the areas that are covered by the association agenda. I personally was affected by COVID, not by getting the virus, but by losing my colleague Peter Wagner, the head of the support group, who went to manage the distribution of medical supplies and equipment in the EU. So in addition to being Deputy Director General of DG NEAR, I'm also acting head of the support group for Ukraine, which reunites me with Ukraine even stronger than in my previous role. So what we are doing very actively is following the debates on the land reform. We are discussing the ACAs and how to move forward even within the COVID crisis. I just had a call with Deputy Minister Kachka on that last week, and we are in touch with the authorities across spectrum. And I will finish by saying that tomorrow morning, full morning, we will spend in our already traditional meeting with member states, the parts of member states that deal with Ukraine, with member states representatives from capitals, and our good friend Deputy Prime Minister Vadim Pristaiko has agreed to join us on the Ukrainian side, and we will also have our ambassador from Mathematikas from Kiev joining. So we will be able to really give a good overview and good picture of where we stand in our relations, and how Ukraine is actually formidably dealing also with the current crisis.
I do appreciate. Please pass our best regards to Peter and all of our best wishes. So I believe that everyone here and in Kiev would wish him all the best and getting back from that challenge. Madam Director said that don't be mechanical in assessing the way how our integration develops. Be more comprehensive. This is the message we hear from Brussels right now. And for that, I turn to Mr. Michael Gahler. Would you agree with this assessment of our current affairs and the current state of Ukrainian integration into European Union and implementation of our association agreement? But the core question of our debate and what people are interested in is, can we do more? And in practical terms, because people in Ukraine want to feel the benefits practically. What would be your answer, sir?
Thank you very much, and welcome to all participants here. And of course, I support and I'm very much in agreeing with what Katarina Mathernova said on the state where we are currently. We from the European Parliament, we are those who are following Ukraine closely. Yes, we see the points where we have currently some question marks. I think the agenda is very clear. We have this association agreement and DCFTA to be implemented, and there are many, how shall I put it, construction sites ongoing. And as you rightly say, the people want to see the effects of the reforms, and there are areas where they see it. When I look at the first stage of the health reform, I think the people feel it, that on the house doctor's level, money follows the patient, the doctor gets paid for that. I have always argued together with colleagues, now it's about the second phase as well, and we are a bit concerned in this field that there are second thoughts amongst certain interested structures, and insofar I would argue, let's stay with the agreed reform agenda in this sector as one example. I'm very much in favor of continuing the further local reforms, the amalgamation of cities, and going with that, that the funds are getting to a decentralized level where it can be used for the design purpose by those who are directly elected. And insofar, it was a bit of a irritation when we had at some point this idea of introducing very quickly changing the constitution and introducing these prefect system, which would then, with previous experiences, probably lead to conflict of competences and who does what and who spends which money. I think all such ideas where certain interested groups might think they would profit from such unclarity, that should be avoided. I mean, there are other fields of policy making which are, well, where I would label a question mark. The recent law concerning the possibility to oust the head of NABU for also retroactively. I mean, the law that built this or constructed this independent body was to get these people out of these deliberate attempts to get them under undue pressure. And insofar, well, these are aspects where I wonder what the real purpose thereof is. And also in the judicial reform area overall, prosecutor general offices, and I mean, we have well noted what Mr. Ivoshapka referred to after he was ousted. So there are issues where not only us, but I think especially, well, as you rightly said, the people of Ukraine, they want to see the results of the reforms, and that it, for their personal livelihoods, it makes a difference. And I could go on with other examples, but I'll stop here. So that to sum it up, to say we want to support the real reformers and not those who pretend. And the agenda is always the same, the agreed agenda, whether there's this government or another government or this party or another party. Our agenda is the agreed one, regardless who is in concrete charge.
Thank you. And this is exactly the point we would like to deliver to the Ukrainian audience. We want to see real progress, but not the imitations of the European integration and the reforms which might be declared by the politicians. So, and now I turn to the European Parliament issues. And if I may, I would like to put my question and to ask Viola von Cramon to answer that question. The European Parliament has always been a unique, I would say, global rostrum to bring a wide global attention to the Ukrainian affairs and to the matters related to peace, reforms, and war against Ukraine waged by the Kremlin. So my question would be related to how do you feel, how you evaluate, is Ukraine on the radars of the European Parliament now? And how would you evaluate the nowadays parliamentary cooperation between the European Union and Ukraine? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting us, for inviting me. Thanks a lot also, Arseny, for your very, very, I would say, committed statement towards the measures coming from the European Union. It's good to hear that people appreciate that you name that you list what Ukraine or how Ukraine benefited in a way from the cooperation with the European Union. I don't want to reiterate everything, but I think it is important to say that Ukraine has a big friendship group in the European Parliament. Petras has this group of friends, and we heading the Ukraine EU delegation, and it's a big group of parliamentarians who are very much interested in what's going on in the domestic issues in Ukraine. But that also means responsibility. That also means we want to see an output. We want to see results. We want to see a progress. And you were mentioning, as Katarina has also stressed, the domestic huddles. Yes, they are 2 steps forwards and 1 step back. And right now, I would say we have to see that we do not see 2 steps back. So, of course, when we pour a lot of money into the country, we have an even bigger interest to see that the money goes in the right direction. And as you said, the money has to serve the people. The money has to serve the interest of the citizens, and not to a small group of people, not to some particular oligarchs, and not to some friends of the government. And so this is something I would say, I guess that many people in the European Parliament are still very well informed of the reform agenda, of what is in the current debate in Ukraine, but we have to sell it to our constituency here in Germany and other countries. And therefore, we have to really know what's going on. And Michael Gahler has mentioned, for example, the reluctance in terms of the health reform. I mean, I'm really heavily disappointed to see that now, while we are looking forward to have the new head for the health agency being appointed, the government pulled back the 3 candidates, but handpicked a friend, obviously, from the health minister, while the health minister has already enriched himself while he is in office for 3-4 weeks. So this is a disaster. This is corrupt, as Ukraine government was always, and this is really disappointing. So in that respect, I would really appeal to everyone who has responsibility, takes responsibility, and who is a decision maker. Please be aware. We as Europeans really are committed, and we would like to see Ukraine even closer to the European Union. I'm absolutely friend. I'm a fan. I'm in Ukraine since '96, working on this. But on the other side, I want to see the reform agenda, what Mr. President Zelensky was applying for. Fighting corruption, serving the citizen, getting the oligarchy out of politics. And when you look closer, you see the opposite. And especially when it comes to security, we are not really sure on which side Mr. Yermak, who is obviously the closest advisor of the president in terms of security and the relation with Russia, on which side he actually stands. And that makes it very difficult also when we come to the question of the sanction. Yeah, I mean, if Ukraine is not in favor of keeping up the sanctions in the European Parliament, who else would then be in favor of that? And how could we lobby for this? So there's a big portfolio on issues, I would call it. Anti-corruption, rule of law, we see a big backlash in that field. And also now when it comes to the money, and we see a very bad absorption capacity. I don't know whether all the projects are really, in terms of environmental rule of law, really capable to pour the money in. So I hope that the COVID response measurements are also democratic, controlled and monitored by the EU delegation on the ground. But of course, it's up to us in the European Parliament to follow up on this. And I'm also a member of the Budget Control Committee, and I'm surely will do this and will very carefully, not because I don't trust Ukraine, but I would like to see the money to be targeted and to be brought it to the people who are in need, and not just a small group of people who have access to the money. This is my main object.
Thank you, and your message is very clear. And now I turn to Petras, and I thank you for joining us as well. And what I will ask you, just to give your own perspective on how you think things are moving in the European Parliament related to Ukraine. And I agree with this point that these days, what disturbs me, that the official Kyiv may send ambiguous signals in terms of the security matters and other things. What do you think about that ambiguity? You are welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Danilov, for having us and having this excellent debate, even in a way. I mean, we do it, so we are always happy to meet our Ukrainian friends and partners in the European Parliament, come to Kiev. And I have to admit that, during these 5 or 6 years in the past, we've been able to develop a very real, very constructive partnership. I think we had a relationship even before, but it was a bit different. Now we are partners, associated partners, and so we have to discuss things as they are. For me personally, I think we have to apply a very clear principle: first neighbor first. And Ukraine definitely falls into the category of this country. So that's why the EU can't look at Ukraine as a country, as a third country with a bit distant history, affiliation, economy not affecting the European situation and so on. I think we've been able to change this narrative very much. And look how much very specific, I would say, instruments, political and economic instruments we've been inventing, and we have invented in order to assist Ukraine in a special way, because Ukraine indeed needs a special attention from the European Union, not because of the size, not because of the complexity of the economy, but because of the Russian aggression and because of the heavy focus of Kremlin on Ukraine. I mean, because I think Kremlin made a very clear calculation. If Ukraine is split from Eastern Partnership, if Ukraine is held in a kind of corner, not let to implement reforms, then it will be a really celebration mood in Kremlin. So that's why, look, we have very intense political contacts. We have indeed cross-party support within the European Parliament of those I would call progressive political groups. And my colleagues, Viola and Michael, are good examples of this standing and very constructive political support. Petras Wagner support group for Ukraine. It's something absolutely out of line. I mean, specifically focused on Ukraine. And now we are looking forward even to take the best example of our assistance or management program and to apply to other countries. And finally, look, we see that Ukraine is getting on its own more ownership of the reforms. And this is great, because reforms are not just for please the European Union and to have a kind of tick, I mean, it's done. I mean, let's focus on another issue. But Ukraine, I believe, really took association agreement and our reforms program as a chance to build a new state. And you're completely right. The cooperation with the European Union for Ukraine means existence, guarantee for existence, and something absolutely different future. So that's why, well, I might criticize some European institutions, but looking at the report which comes from the European Parliament on Eastern Partnership, we emphasize once again that so we have to speak about Article 49 and Article 2, speaking about the future membership aspirations, European aspirations, but as well on conditionality, political conditionality, human rights, freedoms, rule of law, and so on. We want to see Ukraine along with the European experience, best of European reforms experience, which is not easy, which is not given, but okay, it depends on both sides. And every and each Ukrainian should know that those friends and committed partners in Europe will do everything possible to see Ukraine within the category of countries first, neighbors first.
Wonderful. I thank you. And, you know, I would say that I'm happy that we have this kind of discussion today, because we give the opportunity for the Ukrainian audience to hear that the European Union and top senior representatives of the EU institutions, the European Commission and the European Parliament, are indifferent to what is in Ukraine. That this is not a mentorship, but this is the way how to help change Ukraine, change the routine of internal domestic cuisine, which is far from being satisfactory, and if, no one is happy about that. I mean, including those in government. So, and now I turn to Ostap Semerak. Mr. Minister, what we hear that our European partners would like to help, and they give this amount of help to change, to transform Ukraine. Do you think that nowadays Ukrainian politicians and the establishment is ready to accept that assistance for the sake of Ukraine's citizens? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Danilo, and I'm welcoming everybody in this discussion. And I have to say that European integration course and the association agreement from 2014 strongly became an integral part of internal reform agenda, which influenced almost all areas. Previous so-called short government proudly announced that first time in history, the government program has set a chapter of the European integration and association agreement implementation. Actually, that is strange to hear such things as it was rather practiced before 2014, I mean revolution of dignity. And such statement after 5 years of the association agreement implementation in all areas. Definitely, the European integration and association agreement cannot be packed into one even most comprehensive chapter. But each chapter has its strong European integrated related part. This is really symbolic drawback in understanding of European integration. Unfortunately, now European integration, from my point of view, is not among the priorities of the president or government in Ukraine. Process has been really slowed down very seriously. And I see at least two reasons for that. Firstly, of course, that is a political reason, and second is institutional. You know, searching new compromise with Russia in Donbass problem, European integration is not more the priority for president and government at all. And such compromise is not acceptable for us, and that is absolutely understandable. I want to stress that in 2014, 2015, the basis for European integration was established. In a time of urgent challenges related to economic situation and Russian aggression, European integration was among the priority in all spheres for government led by Arseniy Yatsenyuk. And I want to remind that during that period, we established all institutional mechanisms for European integration implementation. Here in Ukraine, I mean Government Office for European Integration as a part of the Secretariat. I mean Institute of Deputy Ministers in all line of ministries, and as well a first planning document aimed at the association agreement as especially DCFTA, definitely DCFTA implementation here. To keep in short, achieved by 2019 progress was giving to us an opportunity to move further stages of integration, to put into practice the full potential of the association agreement and especially the DCFTA. This means that 2019, the year of elections in Ukraine and onward years, had to and have to be used to get more access into European Union internal market and more integrative initiatives. But what we see in the last 7-10 months, a number of developments have taken place which will definitely impact the association agreement implementation. And I mean, firstly, cumbersome association agreement implementation new plan. There is no link with the country reform agenda. Another challenge is losing quality with quality of public consultation, and that is the result of so-called turbo regime in Rada. Another issue I mentioned is passive participation in bilateral bodies of association agreement from Ukrainian side as well, and decreasing capacity of line ministries and government office for European integration. What I can say about Parliament, look, the Rada government roadmap on association agreement implementation is still emerging from autumn last year, and we do not know how the process looks like just now. To sum up, the interior of last 5 or even 6 years is slowing down. We can see the lack of long-term vision and clear plans. As well, capacity of the progress of European integration is going down. And you know, from my point of view, that partly right, but fragmented moves and initiatives really cannot help in this situation.
I do thank you. And now, as we turn to the second part of our discussion, I would kindly ask every speaker to limit your answers up to 3 minutes. And I immediately go with my question to Madam Director. people in Ukraine are afraid that the pandemic, economic crisis, what we face, what the European Union faces, may somehow endanger the freedoms and the benefits of our cooperation with the European Union. Do you share the sense of that problem? Does it sound realistic that it may endanger the benefits? And the second point is that's of paramount interest for Ukrainian business. What do you think? How realistic is the aspiration of Ukraine to sign the agreement on conformity assessment and acceptance of industrial products, what we call in Ukrainian industrial visa-free regime in some sense? So the floor is yours. What would you say?
Then could you specify, when you said about all these benefits, could you specify about the visa-free regime? People are scared. Sorry to intervene. Just to give a clear-cut answer to this.
Mr. Prime Minister, let me say that as the moderator, I put the questions in the way as the moderator has the ability to do that. But if you would like to ask me, I will certainly may clarify that point. Madam Director, that's true. That I believe that this is fair. I can specify the dangers. People are afraid that the freedom of movement, the freedom of entrance to the European Union may be endangered. That people are afraid that the European Union may close its economic attention to Ukraine. So a number of those dangers that we all share, and people would love to hear that. And I thank Mr. Prime Minister for his intervention into that, because he specified the points.
His encouragement. Okay, you gave me 3 minutes and 3 big questions, so I'll try to be telegraphic. First of all, as I already mentioned in my recent interview, where Sergei Sidorenko asked me exactly the same question, there is no connection between the visa-free regime and the pandemic. So don't worry, there is no connection between that. Visa-free regime, however, is of course tied to a number of domestic reforms in the area of rule of law, etc., that Mikhail and Viola spoke about. And we will continue to be vigilant, and we will continue to be your friends, but your critical friends. But don't worry, there is no connection between visa-free regime and the pandemic. Of course, there are restrictions of movement even within the European Union, even within the Schengen zone. So there may be restrictions of movement related to pandemic, but there is no automatism between the pandemic and a revocation of a visa-free regime. So that's one point. The second point on the ACAS, on the assessment of agreement on the assessment of conformity of industrial products. We had a little bit of a few-week hiatus because of the onset of this teleworking regime. But as I mentioned in the first round last week, we had a rendezvous with the deputy minister on the Ukrainian side, looking after this, Mr. Kachka, and colleagues from the different departments of the European Commission that deal with the ACA, and we are doing the pre-assessment that we have agreed on also virtually. We are starting to do it virtually. We will see at which point the experts that have to go on the ground and check the labs and the various institutions on the Ukrainian side will be able to go there. But we are not waiting for the travel regime to kick in to start it. So we are busily working on that on both sides. It's premature to say when the pre-assessment will be done, because that will also depend on how the summer and fall unfolds in terms of the COVID restrictions. And the third point, just want to reiterate that European Union is committed. The support group for Ukraine is a unique body that doesn't exist for any other third country than outside of the EU than Ukraine. We are fully committed. You hear colleagues from the European Parliament fully committed. We are friends and partners, and as friends and partners, we also tell each other the truth, and so expect us to be critical friends, but friends nevertheless. And I'll stop here.
That's true, and the same goes with Ukraine, that we would like to deliver very honest messages to you, because this is, you know, we have to hear each other, and we have to behave as those who believe in this partnership and this integration and the European perspective of our country. And now I immediately go with my question to Ostap Semerak. Mr. Minister, what do you think? How do you, as an expert on the European integration, how do you see the practical agenda of our cooperation for the nearest perspective? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, I will divide into answers, or two short answers. Firstly, we need to bring back the European integration agenda to the top of the internal public reform divorce. Second, we need to ensure that the association agreement implementation priorities are reflected properly in Parliament, President, and Cabinet programs, and at least at political agenda too. Secondly, we need to strengthen all mechanisms to make sure that everything is going well. Next point is very important, and we mentioned today during our discussion, that is communication. All governments reports about the association agreement implementation, but what is very important from my point of view is to communicate well with the society, to understand that life changes that we see is really the effect of implementation of our obligations according to association agreement. And you know, having this feedback and understanding from our society, we will actually ensure that European integration path will going on. And on other hand, we will avoid situation when you know, for all sensitive issues, the authorities will would like to point finger on Brussels. Talking about technical tasks on bilateral sectoral agenda, I want to stress firstly that we need to streamline the ACAA process with a view to sign the agreement as soon as it is possible. Next point is very important from my point of view, that is to ensure effective application of the updated Annex 27 to the association agreement energy chapter. And that is extremely important in a situation that we have just now in Ukraine in our energy sector, and this heavy situation that we are just now. Next important thing for our future cooperation, definitely, that is to make further steps on digital single market, reach an agreement on the review of the DCFTA, and that is very important in the today's situation in economy, because reviewing this agreement, we will have more investments into our economy, and that will be real deal between in our cooperation. And finally, I want to stress that we need to develop our joint vision of our engagement with the European Green Deal. And that is very important because that is one of the priority of the European Union at all.
That point is of extreme importance for Ukraine as well. And I will put the same question to Mr. Gahler. Would you agree with what Mr. Semerak suggested? Would you agree with these practical priorities for the nearest perspective? And frankly, what would you advise the Ukrainian authorities? What kind of ambition to put on in our agenda? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, in principle, I would agree what has just been referred to, and of course, the Ukrainian authorities, they know. Or not only authorities, that is more the executive, but I would say also the parliamentarians and civil society, they know where the necessary reform and efforts are most urgent, and they have to be addressed. And the points that have been raised must be delivered. We alluded already at some of the issues earlier, but insofar I can only encourage those who are working on the implementation of our comprehensive agenda that they simply step by step deliver and report about that, and are in dialogue, in constant dialogue with all stakeholders. That is on the one hand us, but it is far more important to really prove and explain to the people concerned why an agenda is done in all the areas that have been addressed, because otherwise people with all their experience in the past, they will think if, so to say, the deliverables, they don't see it, the change in their daily lives. They think there is a hidden agenda and it's only this label of democracy and European integration, but behind the label we have the old habits. And insofar, I hope that also, for instance, the press sector as one important area lives up to, that is for me a very important thing, because it is owned by the one or the other oligarch or structure. I mean, there is a variety, but it is not necessarily one that in its variety lives up to professional standards always, but lives up to the intentions or demands of the owners. But I think especially the media and the social media, they are very important in all these aspects to explain to the people and to the interested public where the country stands and where more efforts are needed, and where the bad guys are actually acting. If I'm always, when I'm in appropriate circles, I'm always saying, hey, there is a chance also in functioning democracies for those who are currently very rich. There is a chance to be rich and law-abiding in functioning democracies, provided you have a good product to sell or a good service to deliver. What is not enough, and where the people are very suspicious, is that they are rich only because they have good connections. And that should not be allowed. That should be something where each and every measure that is taken should check, is it something that really serves the purpose of making the reform, or does it only serve some people? So, and check it against each and every topic that is on the agenda. And I think this country really has the potential to get ahead and really deliver and become at some point so attractive that we cannot resist. That is my objective. The country is so attractive that we cannot resist also giving a formal status to the country that leads to membership. We are not there yet, but you are, if you deliver, you are far more advanced than some who have a formal status, like Turkey, who today, 10 years or 15 years after the start of negotiations, the country is further away from the EU than it was in 2005. So formalities are not important, but real deliveries and a change in the reality. So then that is my point at this stage. Thank you.
I thank you, and I turn to Madam Viola von Cramon. And my question would be, and if I may to ask to give the answer in the nutshell, my question would relate to an interesting dimension, to the dimension of some of them which is wider than Ukraine alone. What do you think? Is there the political will, the leadership in the European Union that shares the importance of not abandoning not only Ukraine but Belarus, Moldova, Georgia? And in this question, I also turn to the matter of the Eastern Partnership and the format what was suggested for a number of occasions to have the special format of EU +3 countries of the region who aspires the European perspective. What would you say? How do you think is this dimension important, and who may be the leader of that process within the European Union? Thank you.
Well, the leader within the European Union, it's right now hard to figure since most of the leaders very much occupied with the domestic problems and issues. But nevertheless, I'm a bit concerned when it comes to the so-called himself called leader, Mr. Macron. President Macron has issued a non-paper, I have it here in French, issued in October on the new organization and reflection on the Eastern Partnership, and that really is a matter of concern, at least for me. Yeah. Oh, Michael, you are not muted. And it's a bit concerning when it comes to the relation with Russia, where obviously France gives it a preference. And that makes it sometimes, I guess, in the future a bit harder for us to find a common standpoint on how to proceed with the Eastern Partnership. So far, I see a strong commitment towards the Eastern Partnership as it concerns, as regards all 6 member states, as you have mentioned, Georgia preferable, of course Moldova and Ukraine. They are more advanced, as everyone knows, but nevertheless we as Greens are heavily lobbying for the entire Eastern Partnership concept, while we know if we leave 3 of the countries behind, Russia will be happy to pick them up in a minute. So we are very much in favor of keeping the concept as it is, keep the 6 countries together and try to find a way to push them forward and to give them incentives to stick to the reform agenda. But of course, if we see, for example, such as Ukraine, if we see domestic development much more ahead than as we see this in Azerbaijan and also in Belarus, those countries are much more reluctant in terms of democratization, in terms of party diversity, or one of the other pillars which are crucial for a vibrant democracy. Then, of course, we have to find a mechanism, plus mechanism, however we want to call it, what makes it possible for Ukraine to come closer to the European Union. But in general, I guess it is good if we stick to the concept and work on this. And what we have discussed now during the last hour was that even in Ukraine, which is much more ahead than Belarus, we find a lot of, let's say, differences and also difficulties to implement the association agreement. And if I may, I would also like to stress what Ostap has mentioned, the energy chapter, the Green New Deal is of a crucial importance, and is very important when it comes to the Green New Deal being rolled out in the European Union. The Commission has presented the plans. They will renew the plans or review the plans after the pandemic or after the emergent phase of the pandemic. And it is important to include Ukraine into this. But therefore, Ukraine has to be ready to adapt these programs. And so far, we are far away when you look to the whole, to the big amount or the quantity of coal which is used, going back to I don't know, gas and oil. There's no plan for a modern, diverse, decentralized concept for the energy suppliers. It's the opposite. Mr. Kolomoisky gains back territory in that respect. I guess there are a lot of issues which we have to settle out before we can unroll the plan of a Green New Deal, renewable energy chapter. And also I'm responsible for research and science, and I would like to see to have Ukraine included in the science arena, in the research arena of the European Union. And if I ask my colleagues, it is very, very difficult to find high advanced research places. And so I really appeal to Ukraine decision makers to have a reform in that area as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Viola. And now I turn to Petras. And my question would be difficult, and I would ask for a brief reply. Russia. sanctions. Do you think that we will go ahead with the sanctions against Russia? And what do you think, what people think in Brussels about the future relationship with the Russian Federation?
Well, Danilo, there are different views. If you ask different politicians in Brussels, I mean, you might receive very divergent replies. But I mean, so far so good. I would call the concept or formula for relations with Russia we have now. I see no reason to change this strategy and concept, since Russia didn't implement any of those conditionalities we have asked for, and we based our policy line, first of all, on Ukraine, on Donbass and Crimea. So as long as they are not going to implement, they are not moving from the position they are in, so why should we change? And probably we have to talk more in Brussels, not to send too many diverging views and messages to even the Russians about the start of dialogue and so on and so forth. We have to focus on implementation. So that's why, well, you will hear probably no news. I mean, different formulas, but you have to know that we are not going, I mean, to change it because of somebody wants it. I hope that European Union's position will be consensus-based, listening to different countries with different experiences. And I can tell you what we see during coronavirus, and especially in case of Ukraine, this disinformation or cyber war is on increase. So it shows that even during such complicated times, Kremlin is not thinking about the common good, common, let's say, fight against pandemia, but wants to inflict more casualties on countries, neighborhood countries, especially on Ukraine. So that's why let's keep the position we are in, and let's not dream about things which probably do not exist for the time of being, meaning a new dialogue, a peaceful, new kind of cooperation with Mr. Putin.
No appeasement. Thank you. Thank you, Petras, for this answer. And now I target Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. Arseny, what would you suggest as the priorities and benchmarks for our strategic partnership? What is your view?
First of all, I am really inspired with the kind of discussion we are having. It's like a breath of fresh air with no political virus particles in our debate. Okay, it's very clear cut. We really command our joint cooperation. And in my gut feeling that we need to defend the European Union. You have to defend the European Union in your member states, and we have to defend the EU integration idea in Ukraine. We still have a very solid support of the European Union. There are 4 pillars or 4 targets which are the primary one for the Ukrainian people and for our mutual cooperation. The first one, EU membership perspective. We will not just knock the door. We're going to open this door, and we will be the members of the Union. The second one is economy and energy. No doubt that we need to adjust, to revamp, to increase our economic cooperation and energy cooperation, because we already achieved a lot. The third one is the security issue. And it's up to you to maintain no longer obsolete NATO and to do your best in order to provide NATO membership perspective for Ukraine too. And last but not least, and as Petras already mentioned, sanctions. Sanctions have to be rolled over and ramped up, period. Thank you for this kind of discussion.
I thank you, Arseny. As we are almost out of time, I will ask each speaker to have one message, one sentence for the Ukrainian audience that you would like to sum up to conclude our discussion. And I am going to start from Madam Director. Madam Director, are you with us? What would be your key message for Ukraine today? Brief, one sentence.
My brief message will be European integration matters and should matter to Ukrainians, and so do domestic reforms. Keep at it.
Wonderful. Now I turn to Mr. Gahler. Mr. Gahler, what would be your message?
hold your elected representatives to account and demand from them explanations where they deliver, why they deliver, or why they do not deliver on the promises.
Thank you. Viola von Cramon, your message.
It's not so much different. I would call on to the Ukrainian government, keep up your reform agenda so it's easier for us in the European Parliament to be committed and to support you in the long run.
Yes, that's a good point. I call them as well. They don't listen, but nevertheless, we continue calling them. And now I ask Ostap Semerak, what would be your message?
I think that association agreement implementation is the best roadmap for our reforms in Ukraine. And we have to do this not because that is a wish list of European Union. That is important for our future, that is important for our success, and that is important for our win in a conflict with Russia.
Wonderful. Petras, the floor is yours.
I do hope that motivation to build a new Ukraine, European Ukraine, will be same as to fight pandemic and for longer.
Thank you. Thank you. Arseny, the floor is yours.
The Ukrainian people made their existential choice. This is one big united Europe. We will deliver, we will succeed, and we will make it.
I thank you. Our European integration is a huge victory of Maidan. It is a huge victory of the Ukrainian nation. Here, I pay tribute to many Ukrainian politicians, diplomats, civic activists, and public servants who made our Western course real. And I pay tribute on behalf of the Kyiv security to our army, which defends the national choice of Ukraine in real war with the Kremlin. I thank you all for participating and for joining us. That was a great debate, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.